validating the certification. So that is the statutory body who is appointed to validate this certification process. That is the process. In terms of on the PPP contracts, if there is any issue with any part of the building after the fact, be it either inside or outside of the building control regulations, small or large, one of the benefits of the PPP is that the parties responsible and liable to resolve that are still here, and they're here for 25 years, and there's very stiff penalties and deductions from their repayments if they do not remedy anything that is wrong.
But if I'd asked that question 6 months ago, one of those who would have been responsible for the next 25 years would have been Carillion, would it not?
PPP Co.
PPP Co. And you're certain that they're going to be around for 25 years?
I don't think anything's certain, but the contract is there, and I mean, if they're not, then the state has a compensation on termination event with the funders in the contract.
In relation to the current type of PPPs, as I understand it, they were effectively designed to stop big contractors from ripping off the state. But what effectively has happened is that the risk has been put onto subcontractors, effectively the little guy. And these developers are using these subcontractors' good name to get goods in local stores and so on and so forth, hire employees. The Construction Act 2013, the intentions were quite laudable, that these subcontractors will receive periodic payments, but in effect to prove rather meaningless. The subcontractors are in a very weak position when it comes to power and the main contractors. They have no way to enforce it. The state doesn't look behind it or audit it. I mean, do you accept that in effect that those aspects of that Act have failed? They've failed to protect the subcontractors in this country.
I think Deputy and Minister Bruton alluded to that last week. That is something that absolutely has to be looked at. It came up at our meeting with the subcontractors on Tuesday and with the Office of Government Procurement, and it is absolutely something that has to be looked at. If the provisions of that Act are not protecting subcontractors the way they were intended to do, and as you say, was lauded as something that was going to happen at the time, it definitely needs to be looked at, and it is probably the primary action looking forward to be examined by the industry.
Well, I don't think it needs to be examined too hard. I mean, the evidence is here at this committee. The evidence is out on outside the local schools that are the part of this contract. I mean, subcontractors who've done an honest day's work, who've done their job, are losing money hand over fist. Some of them are going wallop. This is their families, their employees, and local businesses. I mean, it has failed, and I would expect at a minimum that any review will be carried out as quickly as possible to see what amending legislation is needed, because the big developers are walking away, or they're going wallop, whatever the case may be, but money is being paid, and these subcontractors are the ones who are being crucified. Can I ask what's the motivation behind bundling 5 schools and 1 educational institute together? I mean, this effectively prices out local contractors from bidding for these projects, yet they end up doing the work anyway, and that's the kind of the irony. The state is effectively saying that we want these big bundles of contracts because we believe only big, massive international developers can effectively do this work. Yet they don't do the work; they subcontract back into Ireland to get local contractors and subcontractors to do the work anyway. So they do the work. So why are they bundled on such large scale?
Deputy, this goes back to 2009, 2010, when the decision was made to bundle this bundle of schools. Maybe I should point out initially, most of the schools being delivered by the Department of Education are done on a traditional and single basis. But if you bundle them, it allows for scale, and it allows to do it maybe as a PPP. At that time in 2010, there was no money there to do it traditionally. But if you did it in an off-balance sheet way, you could do it, and that was approved by the Troika at the time. We met the Troika in respect of the stimulus package that the government introduced in 2010, 2011, and that was approved on the basis that these would be done as off-balance sheet transactions. And for those, you need scale.
You can't do single schools off-balance sheet?
You could if the school was big enough, but you certainly would need a project of more than 70 million to justify that.
In relation to the state's liability, you say you've already taken some legal advice in relation to the matter, but I was curious that one statement was made earlier that the goods in the schools have been paid for. I mean, has the state, the NDFA or whoever actually received evidence to this fact? I mean, has retention of title, claim on title been investigated? I mean, have you seen actual receipts and evidence that all of these goods have in fact been paid for?
Yeah, I think Minister Bruton recently covered this particular issue, Deputy, that if somebody has a claim to title, they're perfectly entitled to, through the courts, claim their goods back. And they would be claiming that against obviously with DIF.
So the state is not going to put any investigation in to see whether these goods that they're taking possession of have in fact paid for. You're just saying, washing your hands and saying that contractors go off to court.
Again, the state doesn't have a relationship with the subcontractors or suppliers here. The state has a relationship with the PPPCO, and it's contractually bound to pay the PPPCO, as I mentioned already.
Strictly what the contract says, but the state does have, I would have thought, a duty of care, and I would have thought many of these people, subcontractors, would have a legitimate expectation that the state would in fact carry out, for example, proper due diligence. I know it was said earlier that you feel that this was done, but Carillion went wallop with a €7 billion debt. It's hard to see how they weren't trading recklessly to leave €7 billion of debt behind them. But you're saying you're simply not going to look behind the goods that you're taking possession of, even though, for example, it has been highlighted and you are on notice by service subcontractors and members of Parliament that these goods, there's a belief, have not been paid for.
Yeah, that's a matter for the PPP code to address that.
Do you not think the state has been unjustly enriched by taking the goods not paid for?
The state is not gaining out of this, Deputy. The state is paying the full cost here.
But you haven't paid so far.
We haven't paid so far, that's correct.
But you are prepared to pay irrespective of...
We are contractually bound to pay the full cost that's in the contract, provided that the services are delivered, and that's our priority, is to get these schools delivered at no cost, at no additional cost to the state.
What engagement is there with the actual schools? I mean, school principals, board of management, parents, teachers, they're caught in the crossfire here. I mean, in Wexford, for example, Wexford town, there's a serious shortage of school places. It's massive pressure. The Loreto have hired new teachers. They've taken on new subjects. They've taken on extra students. The current school is obviously not fit for purpose. But they're caught in the crossfire where they are expected to take possession of a school that they badly need, but where their local subcontractors have serious issues in terms of not being paid for the work carried out. And these, very often, I can guarantee you, there's relatives, there's friends, there's neighbours involved here. I mean, this is a horrendous situation. I mean, what do you say to the schools? Have you engaged with them on this issue?
Yes, together with the Department of Education, we have engaged with the schools. Our representatives would have been engaged with the schools at a local level right throughout the project, and continue to do so throughout the first half of 2018. There were several meetings, collective meetings in Tullamore in the Department of Education, chaired by the senior officials in the Department of Education, which we attended, and tried as best we could to keep the schools and the representatives and the boards of management updated as things developed through the first half of 2018. The department provided a weekly update to the schools by email in addition to that, and we'll be in contact with the schools when we go to site and via phone.
But do you expect then students and teachers to effectively cross a protest in their own hometown to go to school in September? Or are contingency plans put in place?
That is a very emotive issue, and it would be a very regrettable situation. It's obviously something that is being looked at now at the moment and talked about with the department and with the schools, but we're not there yet, and we really hope it doesn't happen, but we certainly will have to plan for how that's dealt with at a local level.
Thank just one last question then. Can I just take it then from all of the statements so far that effectively the state is not going to use any of its leverage of the fact that it hasn't paid any money for these contracts to actually ensure these subcontractors are going to receive any kind of amelioration of their situation?
I think it's important that we don't we're not disingenuous here. The state cannot step in here to rectify the situation of the subcontractors.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator from Nethercott.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and